Welcome back to another episode, and today on the agenda we have main body paragraphs as we continue our look at the analysing argument section of VCE and Year 12 primarily, English and EAL. So, what is the purpose of a main body paragraph? Well, firstly, it is to outline and analyse the arguments that are contained within the text or texts. We also want to address the language that's being used by the authors. We do want to explore and analyse how the language positions audiences, and that's really important, particularly specifying our audiences. And lastly, definitely in our SAC, we need to compare and contrast the articles when possible. So in both Year 12 English and Year 12 EAL, comparison is essential. So with our structure, we want to open with the argument or the reason for the contention. And these are some verbs that I like to use. Argues, asserts, and advocates are the three that I think normally work really well. For more broad arguments or reasons, you can look at outlines, suggest, depicts, or highlights. It is very similar to a topic sentence in a text response essay. So too is the next section. It's our evidence. Now this is where we're looking for quotations from the article. Something to think about is not necessarily focusing on persuasive devices, but more so quotations that are used to position the reader. And these can be short quotations as well. They don't have to be long. Following this, just like in a text response essay, we need to explain and analyse our quotations and how they relate to the argument. And in more detail as well, how they position the audience to feel, think, or act. It's that question again. How are the audience positioned? And we definitely want to specify our audience. Verbs are also crucial for this. So with emotions and feelings, we want to use verbs like evokes and elicits, positions and compels and encourages, particularly for thoughts and actions as well. And even just language like attempts to or aims to is really important because we actually don't know how the audience will react. We're sort of making an educational guess. So they attempt to or they aim to or in an attempt to is just some language, or likely to, intends to is just language that is really useful to use because we can't be concrete in our analysis. And lastly, not in all our paragraphs, but definitely in quite a few of them, we want to link to the other texts if possible. And to stress again, comparing and contrasting language and arguments is important in your SAC for EAL as well as for English. Here are some connectives. We've looked at these before, but they're always good to touch base on again. For opposing arguments, we go with in contrast or conversely, and similarly, or in the same way. If they agree, again, this is not all the vocab that you need to know for comparing. It's just a small sample. Remembering as well our structure when it comes to structuring our main body paragraphs. It's up to you how you want to do it. You might have an anchor text, a main text, which you always open or introduce an argument from that text and then compare whenever you feel you need to. It doesn't have to be in every paragraph, just in the paragraphs where it works. Or alternatively, you can look to analyse the article sequentially. So go through the first article, the second article, potentially the third article, if it's there as well, and link back to the first text whenever you need to. One more time, comparison is essential in your SAC, but it's not essential in the exam. You can still do it in your exam, but it's not essential. So, what are some general tips when it comes to writing main body paragraphs? Well, the first thing I would suggest is to avoid listing persuasive devices, and even just to go the next step further, avoid listing quotations. You need to be considered and selective in the quotations that you use. We want to pinpoint specific information and avoid generalized terms, such as the audience or the author. We want to be really explicit in what these are. So if it's the author's name, always use the author's name. If you're always referring to the audience or the readers, make sure you specify who they are. With this as well, the word reader is frequently used by students. It doesn't really work if the text is a speech. So something to be really careful of is looking at things like what kind of text it is, because that might limit the words that you use. Make sure obviously you embed your quotations. This should be nailed into your routine by now. You should definitely be embedding all your quotations within your all your essays really, and make sure you're always analysing them. Don't leave your quotation hanging like John Proctor. You also want to avoid simplistic analysis, e.g., this is used to persuade the audience to side with the author. That could be for any article in the world. You need to be specific to this article. Tell the examiner or the marker how that quotation, that specific quotation, positions that specific audience. Every single article, the author will have the aim to persuade the audience. You need to go into more detail and more depth in your analysis. And the last tip that I must give all of you is to build your verb and vocabulary lists, because this is a really easy way to improve your expression, which as always is a criteria in essays. So how do we analyse these arguments? Well, the first thing to think about is how are they structured and whether there is a pattern or a sequence in which they're ordered. Think about how the author begins the article. Is it done to shock the reader, or perhaps it's an emotive beginning? Have a think about how they finish the article as well. Quite often you will find authors finish on a call to action. They compel or encourage their readers or their audience to act on the issue at hand. Also, think about whether they complement or contradict the arguments in the other texts, bearing in mind that comparison is a really important part of the analysing argument sack. And lastly, have a think about the shifts within the article. Does the audience change, or does the author change their tone in the different arguments? So here's some vocabulary lists of some verbs. So the first column on the left-hand side goes through topic sentence verbs. And once again, argues, asserts, and advocates, the AAA. They're the three I like to go for, but we've got some more below that as well. Please note, this is not just confined to these words. You can use a topic sentence with a range of different verbs. When it comes to analysing quotations, these are some I like. As I've said to you, evokes and elicits are really useful to use when it comes to positioning an audience's emotional state, and encourages and compels are really good as well when it comes to thoughts or actions. The right-hand column just has those comparative terms, which we've been through a few times now, but it's definitely useful to keep a bank of these because they come in very handy when it comes to comparative unit, which will be next semester. The SAC versus the exam. Once again, the SAC, they are media texts and comparison is essential. It will feature more than one text, your SAC, because that comparison is essential, and arguments are often more broader or tougher to locate. In the exam, it will be a fictional text that you receive. You'll always have that background information. You may do so with your SAC as well, but the exam, the arguments definitely are much easier to find because the essay or the article is written with the essay in mind. So let's have a look at our first example. Once again, we're looking at this Test Pills and Save Lives article by Mikey Kale, which was published in the Herald Sun last year. If you haven't had a chance to read the article, you may do so now by pausing the video. So when it comes to the structure, once again, we're going to outline our argument, we're going to bring in our evidence, we're going to discuss how the audience is positioned, and hopefully we're going to link. And there's our connectives. So the topic sentence reads, Kale continues by placing responsibility on lawmakers by arguing that they should be implementing more harm minimization strategies. So here, the argument is the fact that lawmakers are responsible for implementing pill testing. So once we've outlined our argument, we can go into our language that Mikey Kale uses. And this section says, he lists the potential substances found in illicit drugs including bath salts, cornstarch, soap and detergent, informing parents who lack knowledge on the issue and evoking fear within them for their own children's safety. So there we have our audience, parents. And what is it doing? It's informing them and evoking fear. In addition, Kale embeds an expert opinion from the Australian Festivals Association, which repeats the phrase harm minimisation several times. So there's a quote, and here's our explanation. By softening the depiction of pill testing, Kale highlights the importance pill testing can play in preventing further death and encourages parents to view the strategy as vital in stopping the recent outbreak. Something I've noticed here is the fact that the phrase pill testing is used twice within the same sentence. We probably want to avoid that to ensure our expression is a little bit more complex. So now we're going to compare with the other article, which we don't have in front of us, but you'll get the gist of it in a moment. So while the editorial also specifies the potential substances found in illegal drugs, the Herald Sun conversely argues that pill testing legitimizes the deal as an organized crime. So yes, they both discuss the substances in drugs, but they're different because the Herald Sun uses that to argue that, in fact, it just legitimizes drug dealing. Now, labelling pill testing advocates as parasites, the editorial attacks their argument and compares drug taking with murder. The aggressive tone elicits fear within parents and encourages them to turn their anger on the drug liberalisation lobby, who lack proper foresight on the issue. Now let's have a look at example 2, and this one doesn't contain any comparison, but again, comparison isn't essential in every paragraph, I should say, just as long as you do it a couple of times. This is the article from the 2017 VCAR exam on Spire Primary School. If you haven't had a chance to read this, please pause the video and do so now. So let's read through this main body paragraph, which once again doesn't contain any comparison, and it comes from the VCAR exam report that was published the year after in 2018. Walker opens her newsletter by highlighting the important role Spire Primary School has played thus far in protecting the environment. I often take this school down new paths, contends Walker. Her words, designed to seem self-deprecating when coupled with the phrase, "Oh no, I hear you say," are in actual fact utilised to demonstrate her innovative thinking and commitment to preserving the planet. So here we're looking at how the vocabulary, builds Walker's authority on the issue. Please note as well that those two quotes aren't really embedded fluently, but I guess that's their style of writing that they've used. They want to keep the first person to, gain a sense of how Walker is quite conversational in her tone. Now, whilst it appears to be an admission of her faults, it is actually Walker's attempt to highlight her good nature and thus maintain support from parents. Walker then follows his introduction with a list of all the changes the school, and by extension herself, have implemented in the name of improving the environment, such as the weekly walk pedal to school day and 4 bins, not just 3. Here Walker invites the parents to realise that Spire Primary School has become incredibly environmentally friendly through the introduction of her initiatives. Her enthusiastic use of exclamation marks when listing these initiatives attempts to elicit a feeling of excitement within her readership of parents, who may see the program as a source of pride. By opening with this, Walker seeks to create fondness within parents towards her previous environment initiatives, which may then make them more receptive towards the new waste-free proposal which she is about to outline. Please notice as well, they've actually analysed the argument here. They've talked about the fact that she opens by building on that relationship she has with parents before she brings in her new proposal. So discussing the old proposals and how they've been really sort of exciting and innovative and environmentally friendly, and how this new proposal is going to work. So building on her relationship with parents, that's how she's done it. So what are the key takeouts for our main body paragraphs when it comes to analysing argument essays? Well, the first and most important one is definitely to outline your arguments in the topic sentences. You might have noticed in previous years when this was called language analysis, the focus was definitely on the language. Here, it's more so on the arguments. So it's really critical that you nail those arguments. As I've said previously, if you're unsure what the arguments are, try and work out what the author is saying in the beginning, the middle, and the end, and be really broad with the verbs you use, like outlines or highlights. Try and avoid generalized analysis Remember to be specific about the articles you are analysing. That means avoiding words like the author, the audience, or phrases like persuades the readers to agree with the author. Try and build those verb and vocabulary lists, and you might want to build on the ones from the previous. And make sure you compare and contrast when necessary, and this is particularly important when it comes to the SAC in VCE English and EAL at Year 12.